I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stood at the kitchen sink with my hands under the running water, staring out the window at the backyard my late husband planted 30 years ago, and I made myself a promise. Never again. Let me back up. My name is Vivian. I'm 64 years old, and I own a 4-bedroom house in Decatur, Georgia. A house I've lived in for 26 years. A house my husband Harold and I paid off together before he passed from a heart attack 6 years ago. Harold was a postal worker. I was a school administrator for 31 years. We weren't rich, but we were careful. We saved. We did everything right. And when Harold died, he left me comfortable. Not extravagant. Comfortable. The house was mine, free and clear, and I had my pension and a modest savings account that I'd promised myself I would not touch unless it was a true emergency. I want you to remember that word, emergency. My daughter Renee is 41. She's smart, genuinely smart, the kind of person who could have done almost anything. She has her father's eyes and his stubbornness and, unfortunately, his blind spot for people who don't deserve her loyalty. She met her husband Darnell about 5 years ago at a conference in Charlotte. He was charming. That's the only word for it. The man could walk into a room and within 20 minutes, everyone in it felt like they'd known him for years. He shook your hand and made you feel like you were the most important person he'd spoken to all day. I noticed it the very first time Renee brought him to Sunday dinner. I noticed it, and I thought it was a gift. I didn't understand yet that it was a tool. They got married in the spring of 2022. A small ceremony, just family and close friends. In my backyard under the oak tree Harold planted when Renee was born. It was a beautiful day. I cried through most of it. Darnell looked at my daughter like she hung the moon. And I told myself that I'd been wrong to feel uneasy around him, that my instincts were just a mother being overprotective, that I should be grateful she'd found someone. 8 months after the wedding, Renee called me on a Tuesday afternoon and asked if they could stay with me for a little while. Darnell's contracting business had hit a rough patch. They were behind on rent at their apartment in Stone Mountain. Just a few months, she said. Just until Darnell got the business back on track. They had a plan. They always had a plan. I said yes. Of course I said yes. She was my child. They moved in on a Saturday in February. 2 cars packed with boxes, and Darnell's younger brother Troy helping them carry things up the stairs. I gave them the master guest room at the end of the hall, the biggest of the spare bedrooms. The one with the walk-in closet and the attached bathroom that Harold and I had remodeled in 2015. I told them to make themselves at home. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was not writing anything down. The third was believing that a few months meant a few months. At first, it was fine. Renee helped with dinner sometimes. Darnell fixed a leaky faucet in the hall bathroom without being asked, and I thought, okay, he's trying. They were quiet mostly. They kept to themselves. I told myself this was working. Then month 3 came and went. Then month 5. I started noticing small things. The cable bill went up because Darnell had added a sports package. When I mentioned it, he said he'd cover it, but he never did. The grocery bill crept up too. And when I'd come home from the store with bags, he'd be the one to unpack them and then comment on what I'd bought. Too much of this, not enough of that. Like he was evaluating my choices in my own kitchen. Renee stopped cooking with me on Sundays. She started spending most evenings in their room with Darnell. And when she did come out, she had this distracted look about her, like half of her was somewhere else. I told myself I was being sensitive. By month 7, Darnell had started calling the house our place, in conversation, not to me directly, to his friends on the phone, to Troy when he came over. Come on over to our place. Yeah, we've got space at our place. I heard it through the walls. I heard it in the driveway. I didn't say anything because I didn't know how to say it without sounding petty. Then he started having people over without asking me. The first time it was just Troy and another man I didn't recognize. Watching football in my living room on a Sunday afternoon when I'd planned to have my church friend Odessa over for coffee. I came downstairs and there were two strange men on my sofa and Darnell in Harold's recliner. Harold's chair, the one I hadn't been able to move because it still smelled faintly like him. And Darnell had a beer in his hand and his feet up on my coffee table. He looked up when I came in and said, "Hey, Vi, you mind grabbing us some chips or something?" Vi. Nobody calls me Vi. Harold called me that. My sister called me that. Not this man. Not in my house. Not from Harold's chair. I went to get the chips because I didn't know what else to do, and I stood in the kitchen for a long time after, feeling something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger yet. It was more like watching a storm form on the horizon, that heavy, low feeling right before everything changes. Around month 9, the money started. Renee came to me first. She said Darnell's business was still struggling. They were having trouble getting a contractor's license renewed because of some paperwork issue. Could I loan them $3,500 to cover a lawyer's fee? She'd pay me back by spring. I gave it to her. I didn't ask to see the paperwork. I didn't ask for anything in writing. She was my daughter. 2 months later, it was $6,000 for a work truck that Darnell needed for a new contract he'd just landed. He'd pay me back with interest once the first invoice came through, Renee promised. She showed me a contract on her phone. I could barely read it. The font was small and the screen kept moving. But I trusted her. I trusted them. Then $2,200 for Renee's dental work because Darnell had let the health insurance lapse. Then $4,000 as they were behind on a storage unit that held all their belongings, and if they didn't pay, everything would be auctioned. Then $1,800 here, $900 there, small amounts Darnell would mention casually as he passed me in the hallway. "I'll get you back Thursday, Ms. Barrow." Vivian, I swear. Amounts small enough that it felt rude to make a fuss, but they added up. They added up to over $20,000 before I ever sat down and put it on paper. I sat down and put it on paper one night in October, 14 months after they'd moved in. I wrote every amount in a little notebook I keep in my nightstand. I stared at the number for a long time. $22,400. And they were still here. I want to be honest about something because I know some of you are wondering it. I know, because it's the thing I ask myself over and over in those quiet hours at the kitchen sink. Why did I let it go this far? Why didn't I say something sooner? The truth is complicated in the way that only family can make the truth complicated. Part of it was that I didn't want to be the difficult mother-in-law. Part of it was that I loved Renee so much, I'd rather absorb the discomfort than damage what was between us. Part of it, and this is the part that's hardest to say, was that Harold was gone, and the house was big, and even with everything, there was some piece of me that was glad not to be alone in it. But the biggest reason is something I think a lot of women my age understand without me having to explain it very much. When you've spent your whole life being the one who keeps things together, who doesn't make a scene, who finds a way to manage, that becomes the only way you know how to be. You think if you stay calm long enough, things will sort themselves out. You think love is supposed to be enough. You don't realize until much later that some people read your patience as permission. The dinner happened on a Saturday in November. Renee had told me that morning that Darnell was having a few people over for dinner. Not asking, telling. And when I asked what a few people meant, she said probably 6 or 7. Some folks Darnell knew from the contracting business and their wives. I want you to understand, I wasn't invited to this dinner. It was happening in my dining room, at my table, and I was not invited. I spent that afternoon trying to decide how to handle it. I'm not going to pretend I handled it with any grace. I made myself small. I stayed in my bedroom most of the day reading, and I told myself I'd just come down briefly, say hello, and let them have their evening. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want Renee in the middle of something. Around 7 o'clock, I came downstairs to get a glass of water from the kitchen. There were 8 people I barely knew seated around the table Harold and I had bought at a furniture store in 1997, eating a meal that appeared to have been catered. Boxes on the counter, aluminum trays, the smell of something that definitely didn't come from my refrigerator. Darnell was at the head of the table. Harold's end. He was telling a story and laughing, and everyone was laughing with him. And Renee was sitting at his right hand with a smile I recognized as the smile she used when she was performing being happy. I was almost back to the stairs when Darnell's voice followed me. "Oh, Miss Vivian, hey!" I stopped. I turned. "You mind giving us a little space in here? We're in the middle of something." The room went quiet. 8 people I had never properly met looked at me. In my dining room, standing on my hardwood floors, near the door I'd walked through 10,000 times. I didn't say anything right away. I looked at Renee. She looked at her plate. Darnell chuckled a little, the way someone laughs to take the edge off something they know is sharp, and said, "Just for tonight, you know? Just let us have the room." I turned around. I walked back upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed and I looked at the photograph of Harold on the nightstand. Harold in his postal uniform, grinning that big crooked grin of his. And I said to him out loud, "Okay, I hear you." Because Harold used to tell me something when I would let things go too long. He'd put his hand on my shoulder and say, "Vivian, you can be kind and still have a spine. Those two things are not opposites." I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I woke up at 6 and drove to church early. Before anyone else in the house was up, I sat in the parking lot and made 3 phone calls. The first was to my attorney, a woman named Judith I'd been using for estate matters since Harold died. The second was to my financial advisor. The third was to my sister Constance in Memphis, who had been telling me for months, that I needed to do something and who answered the phone at 6:15 in the morning without hesitation and said, "Finally." Over the next 3 weeks, I did things quietly. Judith drafted a formal notice of occupancy, essentially a written document acknowledging that Renee and Darnell were guests in my home, not tenants, and clarifying that no lease agreement existed between us. She advised me to give them a written notice to vacate with 30 days, which under Georgia law for non-paying occupants in an owner-occupied home was sufficient. I also, with her guidance, sent a certified letter itemizing the $22,400 I had given them and formally requesting repayment. I also called my bank and had the security on my accounts reviewed. I had a locksmith assess my door locks, and I quietly contacted a property manager in my neighborhood about a separate matter I'll explain in a moment. I gave Renee the letter on a Wednesday morning while Darnell was out. She read it at the kitchen table and her face went through about 6 different expressions in 30 seconds. Shock. Confusion. Something that looked almost like relief before she caught herself. Then she said, "Mama, you can't be serious." I sat across from her. I was serious. She said Darnell would be furious. I said I understood. She said, where were they supposed to go? I said that was something they would need to figure out, but I was giving them 30 days, and I meant 30 days. She said I was being cold. I told her I loved her more than anything in the world, and that this decision had absolutely nothing to do with how much I loved her. Then why? she said. I didn't have a speech ready. I hadn't planned to say what I said. It just came out. Because the night your husband told me to leave my own dining room, something changed. And I realized I'd been letting things change for a long time without saying a word. I'm done being quiet. She didn't answer. She folded the letter and put it in her pocket and went upstairs. Darnell came home around noon and he was not quiet about his reaction. I heard his voice from the kitchen. Loud, flat, the kind of voice that's controlled but only barely. He came downstairs and he stood in the doorway to the kitchen where I was making lunch, and he said, with this very particular calm that was somehow worse than shouting, "This is a mistake, Monsieur Vivian." I said, "The 30 days begin today, Darnell." He said, "You don't know what you're doing." I said, "You have until December 19th. The locks will be changed on the 20th. He looked at me for a long moment. He was waiting, I think, for me to apologize, for me to say I didn't really mean it, and could we all just talk about this? That was the version of me he'd met 14 months ago. That was the woman he'd learned to work around. He walked back upstairs. The next 2 weeks were not comfortable. I won't pretend they were. There was a cold quiet in the house that pressed against everything. Renee and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was surface things. Passing in the hall, brief exchanges about nothing. She didn't eat dinner with me. She stopped leaving her room much at all. I would hear them talking at night behind their closed door, voices low and urgent, and I would sit in my room and remind myself of the number in my little notebook. $22,400. And the look on those 8 strangers' faces when Darnell told me to leave my own dining room. That helped. 2 days before their time was up, Renee came to my room and sat on the edge of the chair by the window, and she talked to me. Really talked to me. For the first time in what felt like months. She said she knew things had gotten out of hand. She said she'd been telling herself for a long time that it would get better, that Darnell would turn things around, that she'd pay me back and they'd be out of my hair and everything would go back to normal. She said she'd known, somewhere in the back of her mind, that she was letting something wrong happen, and she hadn't had the courage to stop it. I asked her if she was happy. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "I don't know, Mama. I really don't know." That was the moment that broke me open a little. Not the money, not the dinner. That quiet, honest answer from my child. I reached over and I took her hand and I said, "Whatever you decide about your marriage, that's yours to figure out. But you need to figure it out somewhere that isn't making you smaller than you are. And staying here, the way things have been, is making you smaller. I can see it." She didn't disagree. They left on the 17th, 2 days early. Renee later told me that Darnell had a cousin in Marietta who agreed to let them stay temporarily. They packed the cars over a weekend, and on the morning of the 17th, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee when I heard the front door close for the last time. I sat with that sound for a minute. Just sat with it. Then I went and I changed the alarm code. And I sat back down. And the house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in 14 months. Not empty, not lonely, but clean. The way a room feels after you open the windows and let the old air out. I cried a little. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. It's a complicated grief. The kind that isn't about losing something good so much as finally seeing clearly what you'd been pretending not to see for a long time. The property manager I'd called a few weeks earlier, I'd asked her about renting out the guest room, a legitimate tenant, background check, lease agreement, fair market rent. It's $950 a month. The first tenant moved in the following February, a retired school teacher named Ms. Faulkner, who brings me tomatoes from her patio garden and asks me every Sunday if I've eaten enough. She is, without question, the best decision that room ever made. The $22,400 I gave Renee in Darnell. I don't expect to see most of it. Judith sent one follow-up letter and got a partial response from Darnell promising installment payments that never materialized. My attorney advised me that pursuing it in civil court was possible, but might cost more in time and stress than the outcome was worth, and I've made a kind of peace with that. Not because it's fair. It isn't fair. But because carrying that expectation was costing me more than the money already had. What I do have is this house, my house. The backyard Harold planted. The kitchen table where I drink my coffee in the mornings in silence so complete I can hear the birds outside. I have Ms. Faulkner and her tomatoes. I have Constance calling me every Sunday from Memphis. I have my pension and my savings account, which took a hit, but is intact and recovering. I have my own company, which I had forgotten I was allowed to enjoy. I have Renee, too, though that's more complicated. She and Darnell are still together. She called me a few weeks after they left, and we talked carefully around the edges of everything, the way you do when things are still tender. She's been in counseling, she told me. Individual, not couples. She said she's working through some things. I told her I loved her and I meant it, and I didn't ask for an apology, though I won't say I wasn't still waiting for one. We have lunch about once a month now. It's slow, but it's something. The first lunch we had, she looked at me across the table and said, "I'm sorry, Mama." I should have said that a long time ago. I told her what her daddy used to tell me, that you can be kind and still have a spine, that those two things are not opposites. She laughed a little. The real laugh, not the performing being happy one. I'm still learning at 64 that the people who truly love you will not ask you to disappear in your own home. They won't ask you to make yourself small, to leave the room, to hand over what's yours piece by piece and call it love. Real love, the kind Harold showed me for 32 years, makes space. It does not take it. I stayed quiet for too long. I know that. And I'm telling you this not because I want sympathy, but because I wonder sometimes how many of you are at month 7 or month 10 or month 10 or month 2 of something similar, telling yourselves it will work itself out, telling yourselves it would be worse to say something. I want you to know that saying something, even when it's hard, even when it costs you, even when the person you say it to is someone you love, is not cruelty. It is not coldness. It is the most self-respecting thing you can do. Harold always knew that. I just had to find it for myself.